Hello, it is March 5th, 2022. This is As the World Burns. I'm your host, Randall Burns. Today's topic is the book Richer, Wiser, Happier: How the World's Greatest Investors Succeed in Life and Markets by William P. Green. William P. Green was a financial journalist who had the chance to interview some of the investment greats of the 20th century and the 21st century. Starting out in the book, he discusses his interview of Sir John Templeton, one of the great value investors of the 20th century. And the thing that I thought that really stood out about this interview was that Sir John Templeton was a master of the inner game of investing, of regulating his emotions and thinking very carefully about his investments in that context. Sir John Templeton made some very astute investments made with borrowed money right before World War II started that made his initial fortune. And he also, towards the end of his career, made some very successful short-selling moves. But a lot of his astuteness was, according to Green, mastering the inner game. Now, that's discussed in depth in my review of the book, The Science of Getting Rich by Wallace, Wattles. That book is focused on the inner game of wealth accumulation. It should be noted that Sir John Templeton was quite a religious man, and his wife was a Christian Scientist, which is kind of a cousin of the New Thought movement, of which Wallace Wattles was an important thinker and writer. William Green also interviewed Charlie Munger, who was a serious polymath, and the cornerstone of his investment philosophy was to avoid doing anything seriously stupid. One of the phrases that came from the Charlie Munger interview that I thought was interesting is, take a simple idea and take it seriously. A couple of embodiments of that idea include Jack Bogle, who was the creator of the first low-cost index funds. What Bogle notices that most investors cannot match the market, and so he enabled them to do so at low cost. A simple idea, but he really made a name for himself with it. Another is Ed Thorp, who was a probability expert who invented, or at least popularized, card counting in blackjack, and also found ways to exploit minor statistical issues with major markets and made a fortune at it. Green also discussed it at some depth, the investment strategy of Mohnish Pabrai, whose model might be learned from the best, and that included Charlie Munger's partner, Warren Buffett, pictured in the photograph of him. And he largely copied and enhanced Buffett's trading strategies. One thing that's also noted about Mohnish Pabrai is that he really did live for something beyond himself. He started some schools in India to help gifted people from poor families get into IITs, which it turns out is a remarkably cost-effective and high-leverage form of philanthropy. Two of the experts on the analysis of companies that he interviewed were Joel Greenblatt and Will Danoff. Greenblatt was unusual among the sample that he looked at in that he's a very warm, poised person, has good luck at lasting relationships. He was also a Ben Graham protege. Will Danoff, again, was in a similar mode, did very careful analysis of companies, and that was his strong suit. Howard Marks is another, like myself, a University of Chicago product. He did an MBA there. And one of his great insights was that not all markets are really very efficient. Now, that goes back to the work of Frank Knight, who was an economist that preceded the efficient market hypothesis. And the point that Frank Knight makes is that you have to have at least 20 or more participants in a market for it to move towards efficiency. And this is a point that's often missed. It isn't an accident, for example, that a lot of the greatest fortunes, initial fortunes, are made in real estate, which is a market, again, where you simply don't meet Frank Knight's efficient market criteria. Nick Sleep and his partner, Qais Zakaria, drew inspiration from Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which are kind of a countercultural oriented book, very popular during the 60s and 70s. And they ran their fun in a kind of a quirky way that was not in the mainstream of their day. But that just goes to show that the source of inspiration can be not necessarily from mainstream or conventional sources. And that's, I think, an important factor here, that, we have, people like Templeton, who's very conventionally religious, and then others that are drawing their inspiration from very different sources, but they all have that quality of persistence. Laura Geritz had a love of travel and leveraged that in her investment career. There's a chapter on establishment of investing habits and self-control habits. One of the examples they give with that one is Tom Gayner, who was a very disciplined long-term investor. I can relate to him. He's a long-term weight loss success story, which I am also. What they don't really go into is just how rare that accomplishment really is, and I do emphasize on this one. I'm down 100 pounds from my peak personally. One of the embodiments of persistence and longevity in this is Irving Kahn, who was at one point the world's oldest active investor. Kahn was also at one point the teaching assistant at Columbia for Ben Graham, who later on would mentor Warren Buffett and the generation that became the first value investors. Ben Graham pretty much invented the idea of value investing. And I review Ben Graham's book in The Intelligent Investor, which is his most famous work. Now, the Richer, Wiser, Happier is a good book. It'll give you a feel for the mindset of investors. It'll humanize a lot of these principles that we talk about. I think most people will find something that they can relate to somewhere in this book. And that's one of the positive things about it. You will not get detailed analysis. You will get the human side of the equation, and you'll get a window onto the inner game of some of these investors that you can use it to look more in depth at someone that you can relate to. And I think it's positive from that standpoint. Thank you very much for joining me. This is Randall Burns signing off. Please do like this video. Please subscribe. Suggestions for future videos are welcome. This was a book that a viewer suggested. And I do want to get you guys more material and look forward to seeing you again soon. Signing off.